introduction. My original time slot for today was 90 minutes, and this has been causing me a bit of distress over the past few weeks. Trying to figure out how I might entertain you all for that length of time. So I turned to my closest advisors for some help in figuring this out. So here they are, the center of my pod. So their advice came with much enthusiasm and very little hesitation. Mac, who is 8, offered the following advice. He said, well, Mom, you could just talk really slow. I thought that was a great idea, but probably not too fun for all of us. So they collaborated on the next idea. Reed, who is 5, suggested I take a phone call during my talk. His brother had the specific strategy. Yeah, Mom, just have Dad call you. Good idea. So I thanked them while suppressing my laughter, and Reed offered one more piece of advice. He said, oh, Mom, you just have to tell your students that you love them. He somehow got it. He knew what I was here to do today. So being invited to join you for your Find Your Pod experience made me realize that my journey has really been about just that, finding my own pod. It's taken me to this point in my life to find the friends, family members, and community supports, coworkers as well, that allow me to genuinely be myself without apology. Now, I am from the Midwest, so I will always apologize for the slightest inconvenience or imperfection. I use the standard Midwest greeting when you visit my house. Hi, please excuse the mess. Even if I've spent the last 48 hours scouring every surface, picking up every stray toy, speck of dust, or other item that might be laying around. But I still want to be accepted and ultimately well-liked. I want to ensure I'm not hurting others with my speech or my actions, but I've also learned to value that I am unique, and I don't need to be everyone's first choice. I've come to these changes because I've created a pod that has shown me such acceptance, non-judgment, and love that I can still glimpse my best self even in the hardest moments. So I am myself a Whatcom graduate. I'm also a first-generation college student. And I think my story is important for you on this day because it's not a linear story. It's not a story that started with a clear goal in mind and a straight path toward that goal. I floundered along at times. I repeatedly chose to take unexpected paths that arose, and I was continuously surprised by my own ability to do hard things. And while the life I've created may look nothing like the life you seek for yourself, you might find something of value in my experiences, learn from my mistakes, or at the very least, hear some interesting stories. I do teach psychology after all. I think every day about the keys to well-being and happiness. So while I always believed I would go to college, and I developed an interest in psychology while a student in high school, I had a lot of skills to develop and a lot of belief in myself to discover before that would all become a central focus for me. I believed I would go to college because my father expected it. It was part of my life script from an early age. My dad always held high academic expectations of my sister and me and told us we would go to college. Unfortunately, his plans to provide the funding for our education were met with an ugly divorce amidst an ugly recession. So this was supposed to be my college fund. All right, does anybody know what kind of car this is? Yeah, it's a Cobra. So this is a 1966 AC Cobra, and yes, it is a real one. My dad restored this car by hand in our home garage from the scrap of metal that remained after the original car went off a cliff in Colorado. Yeah. So he bought it for nearly nothing and turned it into a 6-figure investment. So throughout my childhood, my dad would wake up at 4:30 each morning and commute 45 minutes to Grand Rapids, where he worked as a pattern maker, designing parts for cars. At the end of the day, he would make the drive home, cook a delicious dinner, and head out to the garage where he would work on restoring the Cobra or other projects that he took on to fund the Cobra's restoration. He'd work until about midnight. Some evenings he'd come in earlier to fight with me over my math homework, or sit to enjoy some Lay's potato chips and a Pepsi while watching auto racing on TV. He'd wake up the next day and he'd do it all again, never sleeping more than 4.5 hours a night. Then one year into my sister's college education, my dad found out he had to hold on to the Cobra longer than expected. Otherwise, he would lose half its value to his wife, and that was already reduced by the recession. So he'd been married to his second wife for about 5 years, and things ended very badly. It was a major heartbreak to me to have my trust in my former stepmom so completely and very publicly violated. Although my own relationship with her had not been healthy for many years, I was profoundly hurt by the loss and the pain that it caused my dad. So my college plans were certainly not my focus during that time as I was entering high school. But finding myself a place, a new safe pod, became essential. Fortunately, my interest in working with children and my passion for psychology provided me that place and the drive I needed to pursue my college education. I think children provided the balm for the hurts that I was receiving at home. Children can be wonderful at practicing with the therapist. Here's another nice picture of my dad that I skipped. Children are really adept and natural practitioners of what the therapist Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard. They love us without conditions for our worth. They accept us without judgment. So I took every opportunity to babysit and to spend time with children. I became amazed at the process of child development and the unique way in which each child moved through each stage. Then, while hanging out at the library with my sister one Saturday, and yes, we like to hang out at the library for fun, I found a book that described this man, Jean Piaget. His job was to play games with children and write about it. To me, that sounded like the best job ever. Well, I didn't know it at the time. This was my first experience with psychological science. So my interest in psychology solidified on my first day of high school. Not my first day of high school, my first day of high school psychology class, some 5 or 6 years after seeing Jean Piaget in that book. That day, I sat there in wonder as Ms. Baraboo described what we would be learning about in her psychology class. These were the questions I asked. These were the things I wanted to understand about myself and the people around me. I hadn't known before that there was an entire field dedicated to understanding our behavior and mental processes. So I was always a decent student. I met my dad's expectations for a high GPA. I attended classes pretty regularly, and I loved to read. But it took me great effort to focus on biology, chemistry, and even English literature. While I was a voracious bookworm since childhood, I found the pace of the reading and the number of assignments in my English classes just exhausting. Then there was my AP English teacher who told me that my interpretation of poetry was wrong because it didn't match her interpretation. So I just felt that was not my particular pod. Well, my geometry teacher was someone that I invited to my home graduation party, and yes, she actually came. It was another teacher who ruined my belief in my abilities to do math. After a meeting with him regarding my failing grade, my dad came home and told me I figured out the problem. I was so relieved to have a clue as how to rescue my GPA, and I asked him what it was. His response was, "There's nothing you can do. That guy's just an asshole." Well, okay then. So I continued on with Ms. Baraboo after completing all of the high school's provided psychology courses and created an independent study for my senior year. sleep, I think. Hopefully you weren't feeling the same way. So my teacher simply asked me to come up with a list of topics that I'd like to research, and then write a paper about each of those topics. So she told us about this developmental disorder called autism, and I included it on my list because I was so interested in child development. At this point, I had met children with a myriad of skills, challenges, and developmental courses. I found it fascinating to hear that there were sometimes commonalities among these patterns, making for unique but related profiles. Well, it was the early 90s. There was very little understood about autism spectrum disorders. In addition, my access to research was very limited by a lack of internet, a very small school library, and a limited public library. It was time for some first-hand research. I arranged to spend a day in a nearby classroom for children with developmental delays. That day, my fascination for exceptional children bowled me over. There was one little boy in particular who was equally fascinated by me as I was by him. He was nonverbal, extremely impulsive, and had severe sensory processing challenges. We connected on some very deep level that left his teachers amazed and left me devoted to finding ways to be a safe, chill person in the lives of children with special needs. Recognizing my lack of training and qualifications to work in that field, I focused on working to earn money to pay for an education. I still held on to that part of my identity that said I would be a college student. But once you're working full-time, it can be really hard to make room for classes in your schedule. Piece by piece, I would eventually complete my associate's degree, taking 10 years to earn enough credits for my transfer degree to Western. Then I went on to earn my bachelor's, then my master's, and then I spent 4 more years in graduate school studying clinical mental health counseling. Along the way, I held a lot of different jobs to fund my education, while also living pretty comfortably for a college student and being able to travel a bit. So here's a list of the jobs I held along the way. So which one do you think I held the longest?
Ice cream server.
Not the ice cream server, no. I worked for a time, my father's ex-wife had an ice cream shop, so that was my first job. I was paid a whopping $2.25 an hour to make ice cream cones. Not the restaurant, no. Longest position was as a nanny and household manager.
Oh.
Yeah, I spent about 9 years with a family, starting when they had 3 children and ending when they had 6. They went on to have 1 more for a grand total of 7. But it wasn't your traditional nanny job. It wasn't just childcare. I was responsible for scheduling multiple nannies, overseeing a cleaning staff, a yard crew. I purchased their vehicles, planned their vacations, selected the children's after-school activities and took them to them. And when the family moved away, I even selected the children's new schools and furnished the family's new home. Well, I thought this role would prepare me for the one that I had always known I would fulfill one day, that of being a parent. What I found once I actually became a parent is that nothing can really prepare you for that job. But that's another talk altogether. So along my way, opportunities to work with children with special needs just kept coming my way. Looking for more balance between the demands of the primary family that I was working with and my classes, I answered an ad on Western's job board for a part-time nanny position for another family. During the interview, the mother shared with me that one of her twins, a toddler at that time, had Down syndrome. She wondered if I'd be comfortable working with him. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Well, we were both pretty thrilled with our luck at having found one another. What I soon found working with this family in particular was that their daily life at home was much different than the other families I'd worked with before. Their days were, of course, filled with endless laundry, meals and dishes. The kids had tantrums and moments of such pure joy that the house would be overflowing with giggles. There were lost socks, messy meals, and lost library books. What was unique was that while managing all of that, there were also days filled with nebulizer treatments for the twins who had severe reactions to even the slightest respiratory illness. There were occupational therapy and speech therapy appointments to run to multiple times each week. There were specialized play groups and home visits by a team of specialists supporting the family and meeting their child's needs. While she managed it with extreme grace, I saw the mother's exhaustion. I saw that she never got a break. She would grab a bowl of chips and salsa to eat as she worked at her desk and call it a meal. She would get up at 4 a.m. to run on her treadmill to make sure she was strong enough to get through her days. She would steal rushed moments in her home office to run her own company in between all of these duties, taking care of her family. So it was extremely important to her that someone would be there in her home that would give her the space to be and to be the best for her family. I soon realized other families must need such support too. Someone to approach the never-ending list of, have you tried suggestions that would come their way and they wanted to try. Someone to complete the homework assigned by that team of therapists to help her son continue to exceed everyone's expectations. Someone to give undivided attention to her 2 other children. Someone to hear her and understand her overwhelm was never an indication that she would ever choose any differently. I saw here an opportunity that would fill not only my heart, but also a need of an entire community. But I still had a lot to learn. I still had credentials to earn. I still needed the rest of my pod to get the rest of the way there to fulfill those needs. So finding your pod does involve a certain amount of luck, right? Like I found in that interview. I see a certain amount of luck in the parents that I was born to and the gifts they gave me, as well as those they nurtured, in the sister they provided me, in meeting my husband on a chance encounter, and for him to continue choosing me every day. He shares with me his awesome band of aunties and his amazing group of friends. I also won the genetic lottery with my kids and the people that they are. I lucked out in finding some amazing friends in graduate school, with the added benefit that they are all mental health or school counselors. And I lucked out in my pod here at Whatcom, the amazing group of colleagues that demonstrate such integrity every day and support me in times that are tough. So there is some luck, but finding your pod also requires some intention and a bit of direction. Intention means we have to make some hard choices to create the life we want. It wasn't until long after I left my father's house at no more than 18 years of age, determined to be independent and trying to grow up way too fast, that I realized I had the power to shape the community with which I surrounded myself. If I intended to have the life I loved, I had to choose wisely, else it would be the critics, the bullies, the naysayers who determined my life's course. So this realization took root for me when I read the entry my father had made in my sister's wedding guest book. This was the first time that I realized that there was intention behind what I had always perceived as a very hands-off approach to parenting. My dad was a firm believer in letting us make our own decisions, then smugly standing by to hold our hands while we cried through the wreckage of our poor choices. I don't remember exactly how he worded his message to Nicole, and I'm not sure I was meant to read it, but he stressed to my sister how the choice she was making was hers and that he would proudly stand by, however the course she chose turned out. That struck me so profoundly at that moment because I was feeling swept up in life. I felt powerless to guide my life's course. Hearing that I could decide for myself shook me and led me to change course and again focus on my education. I didn't understand until very, very recently, as I prepared for this talk and listened to a talk by Jay Shetty, that in the choices we make, we are forced to choose from the options of which we are aware. We have to choose what we will be the best from the set of choices we're presented with. I had made so many of my choices in friends, in relationships, in jobs, and in setting goals for myself that were completely limited by my being unaware of what else existed. Honestly, I didn't know anyone with a master's or a PhD when I started college. So I set my goal of attaining a bachelor's like my eldest cousin, the first in our family to hold a college degree. And once I got to Western, I was surrounded by people with graduate degrees. So I set my sight on a master's. It didn't take long before I was steered toward the idea of pursuing a PhD. So what I see happening here at Whatcom, what this day is about, is that we're striving to help students succeed by broadening their awareness of the choices they have. Efforts such as the guided pathways and today's Find Your Pod event serve to take what you know about yourself and the options before you and helping you see beyond the choices you have already considered. Our student clubs and the experiences they offer all have the potential to broaden your choices. So this interaction of a little bit of luck and choosing wisely, I now realize has been guiding me toward this life. It's been guiding me toward this life I love all along. I stand here today with a heart so full that it easily spills out in tears whenever I'm emotionally touched. Many of you have witnessed this. It might be a puppy that's just too cute, or perhaps a baby. It might be observing a kind act. Every episode of This Is Us. Someone scoring a goal or getting a grade they thought was beyond their reach that starts the tears rolling. But I fill my heart by nurturing to choose relationships that build me up. They allow me to reciprocate graciously, and they make me proud to say, hey, I know them. I love them, and they love me. Okay, so before I continue in my story of finding my pod, and as you can see, it is not a linear one, I encourage you each to take a moment to reflect on the pod you've cultivated so far. It might be a pod of 20, or it might be a pod of 2. Today, it might seem it's just you, traveling on your way to create that new pod that will swim in your direction and tow you along when you need it. For just a moment, I want you to think about your pod and let the gratitude flow for you being here today with us, joining the WCC pod, and knowing that this campus community is grateful for you. So we're going to take a breathing break. Oops, there we go. I want you to take a nice, slow, deep breath in and fill your belly with air as you fill your heart with gratitude. Now exhale even more slowly and let go of regret. Breathe out a little bit further and push out your doubt. And then repeat. And if you have tissues, now might be a good time to share. Some of you may have already heard the story of the mystery stranger who set me on my course toward Bellingham. The stranger who bought my airline ticket that first brought me here. I cannot think about gratitude without thinking about this stranger, or how I found my pod, without telling you about his act of altruism. So, as a young college student, I lived for some time in Flagstaff, Arizona. I worked as a full-time secretary for a volunteer fire department while attending Northern Arizona University. And then I transferred to the local community college to fulfill some job requirements. I made a visit home to Michigan during one of the semester breaks, where I rekindled the romance with my high school boyfriend, who had up and left me for the sole purpose of moving to a mysterious place called Bellingham, Washington. After this visit home, my family drove me to the airport, and we had a tearful goodbye. I wasn't sure I wanted to be going back to Flagstaff. I hadn't quite found where I fit in there, and I wasn't sure when I'd be able to come home again. I arrived in Chicago to make my connecting flight to Phoenix, and I was approached by a stranger. It was this man I didn't know. He said he was a fellow passenger on my flight to Chicago. So at 21 or 22 years of age, I was somewhat worldly enough to be skeptical, but he assured me he wanted nothing from me. He told me he'd seen me saying goodbye to my family and was touched by the level of emotional connection he saw there. He wanted to help me come home again. He told me he'd buy me a plane ticket for my next visit home. He gave me his business card and encouraged me to email him once I was back in Flagstaff. Never one to pass up a deal, I did. He held true to his offer to buy a ticket, but asked that I not use it to visit an old boyfriend. Well, that was exactly what I planned to do. After exchanging several letters, yes, handwritten letters, postage stamped, wait a week to get a response kind of letters, my boyfriend and I had decided to give things another shot. Not wanting to be deceitful, I told the stranger that my plan was to come visit this boyfriend, and he agreed to still fund my travel. He mailed me a money order for something like $426, and I bought my ticket and flew off to Seattle. 22 years later, I'm still here. No, the boyfriend's no longer here, and that was one of the hardest choices I had to make. It was one of the hardest moments in choosing my pod. After 8 years together, I broke off our wedding engagement 6 months before the wedding, very much in response to my father's words to my sister about choice. So here I was, alone, in Bellingham, a Whatcom student, with a fierce determination to continue my college education. Over the years, I sometimes strayed from the psychology path, and it was always into education. But oddly enough, I never truly thought I could be a teacher. I was too shy. That is, I had too much social anxiety. My public speaking experiences in high school still make me cringe with embarrassment. I also felt like I could never know enough about anything to teach other people about it. So how did I end up teaching? Even after I applied for my original teaching post here at Whatcom, I didn't see myself as a teacher. What convinced me that I could do the job I do now was the letter of recommendation provided by my graduate advisor, the late Ethan Remmel. It was he who sent me the job posting for the adjunct faculty position in psychology. He simply sent me the link with the line, "I think you'd be a great teacher." I didn't believe him, but I missed school. I missed being academically engaged and challenged in that way. That part of my brain was just itching for some attention. And I certainly couldn't afford any more student loans. so more school was off the table. I applied, eager to get back into school and believing I would never get a call back. Then Ethan sent me his letter of recommendation, which is not common practice for those to be open to the subject of the letter. He convinced me I could do the job. And it turns out he was right. And it turns out I love it a lot. When I get asked why I received that Faculty Excellence Award last spring, I think back, I guess I received it this fall, I heard about it last spring. I think back to all the student feedback I've received over the years, and I think that's why. I think it's because I truly love what I do. I love what I teach about, and I do love my students. I love you for the lessons you teach me. I love you for being vulnerable and trusting me while you grow. I love you for changing the world for the better. You are my pod. Not yet. So I joined the Whatcom pod long ago, and I started forming my connections here back then, in the late 90s. I haven't looked back at my transcripts to know if it was my very first class, but one of the first classes I remember here was Tony Will's interpersonal communication class. Tony was new here too. He was fresh out of graduate school. I remember sitting in his class between a 16-year-old Running Start student, something I never even knew was a possibility, and a middle-aged woman who was returning to school after having raised her own children. I remember having to have uncomfortable conversations. Then, about a decade later, I returned to Whatcom to teach myself. Picking up the photocopies of my syllabus at the tiny copy center that used to be in Cascade, whose voice should I hear coming down the hall but Tony's? I turned and said, "Oh my goodness, you're Tony Will. I was a student of yours a long time ago." Without missing a beat, he said, "Melanie Mack," that's my maiden name, "I remember you." It's about 10 years later. You took an interpersonal communications course from me. Now, the fallibility of memory is going to come into play in this story, because as Tony remembers it, I exclaimed, "I only knew you by your voice. You look so old." Now, I doubt I would have ever uttered those words, and I remember exclaiming, "I only knew you by your voice. You look so different." Anyway, I recognized at that moment that if I was going to join this pod of WCC faculty, I had to up my game. I had to let down my armor and get to know my students. I couldn't lecture nonstop for 2 hours to prevent them from asking questions or interacting with me out of fear that I wouldn't know the answer or that they would get to know the real me. I had to actually teach. I had to engage with my students. So by the time I transferred from Whatcom to Western, I knew that I wanted to declare psychology as my major. I also knew that studying psychology involved a fair amount of neuroscience and statistics. This terrified me. After my experiences in high school math, verified by my sad quantitative GRE scores, and my limited success in chemistry, I doubted I would make it through my first quarter. But I found out I could do statistics, and I understood neuroscience. As someone who finds confidence in being overly prepared, I was surprised to discover that when you first start a course of study, you aren't expected to know it all already. Yeah. I had the good fortune to have excellent teachers who took the time to build our understanding up little by little, so that we didn't even realize we tackled the hard stuff until we were doing it. The way I discovered my own academic potential demonstrates what's called the foot in the door technique. I got there little by little, not by saying, hey, I'm going to be a professor one day, but little, by finding I could do hard things. In terms of finding my pod, my luck combined with my power of choice to select my classes based on the instructors whose teaching style worked for me. These became my mentors. These became the members of my thesis committee who would return when I would return to Western for my master's. So all this while, I was choosing majors, working ridiculous hours, finding ways to stay physically active, and trying to see a bit of the world beyond beyond Bellingham. But I had my pod. Did you know that orcas form matriarchal pods led by the females? Mine really was too. Although my dad was our primary parent from the time I was 10, I found guidance and inspiration from the women in my life. From my grandmother, who raised 4 rowdy kids with the help of her life companion, my Aunt Jeanette, while both climbed the ranks of factory jobs during an era when men always took the leadership roles. From my mother, who continues to show me the power of empathy, as well as the need to rein it in at times. She survived breast cancer, diagnosed at 35. This picture is from her 25-year celebration of life, remaining free of cancer for now 33 years. She never failed to surprise us with impromptu adventures and make sure that we were emotionally healthy. Then there was Mrs. Roberts. I don't have an image of her, but she was the mother of a childhood friend. She was the mom whose door was always open, whose cookie jar and mac and cheese cupboards were always well stocked. She never hesitated to protect and defend us, nor to call us on our BS. She always had a shoulder ready for our tears. Later came my now stepmother, who showed me you don't have to have it all figured out at 18. She made a major career change in her 40s. She left the corporate world to simultaneously direct 2 branches of the United Way when she found she needed more meaning in her life. Then she made another switch when a donor to the United Way recruited her to manage her nonprofit, as well as her little hobby, which was an Olympic qualifying dressage horse farm. So there are the aunties in my pod, on my side of the family and my husband's. Those women who never ever miss a birthday and never utter a negative word about anyone. Man, I wish I could do that. I seriously channel their personalities when I'm having a rough day and I'm finding it difficult to connect. Then there's my sister. She shames me with her ability to present me to others in a light that I feel I could never uphold in reality. Seriously, anyone who meets me through my sister starts out with expectations way too high for any mortal to live up to. She's always been my person, my strongest cheerleader, the one I can call in the middle of the night just to talk. We think in such the same ways that when we would play these huge, boisterous 15-person games of Pictionary on our family trips, the game where you have to draw a picture of a word presented on a card and your partner has to figure out what it is, we were always accused of cheating. Case in point. During one game, I pulled a card with the word divot, meaning a chunk of grass that's missing. For some reason, this triggered in my mind an association with a rivet. So I did a really nice, quick drawing of a pair of blue jeans with an arrow pointing to those little metal tabs that hold everything together. I drew a rivet. My sister shouted out divot, and we won the championship. That's how closely connected we are. So these women guided me through tough times. They inspire me each day to be better, to do better, to keep in touch with the people I love. And as you find your pod, you will face tough times. You'll have to make some difficult choices. You'll face such stress that you want to lay down on the floor and cry, as I did one day after a particularly hard meeting with my graduate advisor. Fortunately, my office mate, Katie, was there and just sat down on the floor with me and rubbed my back and said, "I believe in you." Your connections are what are going to get you through. I'm a psychology teacher, so I have to leave you with some research to back up what I've said to you today. Stress, the state of being out of balance, is inevitable as we grow. So I'm going to encourage you to connect with the stress that it happens. Don't ignore it. Don't try to suffer through it alone. The research I'm going to share with you is presented by Kelly McGonigal. She's a health psychologist, and she talks of having taught for a decade about how stress is going to kill you, because it has the potential to do so. But she urges us to make friends with stress so that it won't. So here's what the experts have to say.
Now, I said I have over a decade of demonizing stress to redeem myself from. So we are going to do one more intervention. I want to tell you about one of the most underappreciated aspects of the stress response. And the idea is this: stress makes you social. To understand the side of stress, we need to talk about a hormone, oxytocin. And I know oxytocin has already gotten as much hype as a hormone can get. It even has its own cute nickname, the cuddle hormone, because it's released when you hug someone. But this is a very small part of what oxytocin is involved in. Oxytocin is a neurohormone. It fine-tunes your brain's social instincts. It primes you to do things that strengthen close relationships. Oxytocin makes you crave physical contact with your friends and family. It enhances your empathy. It even makes you more willing to help and support the people you care about. Some people have even suggested we should snort oxytocin to become more compassionate and caring. But here's what most people don't understand about oxytocin. It's a stress hormone. Your pituitary gland pumps this stuff out as part of the stress response. It's as much a part of your stress response as the adrenaline that makes your heart pound. And when oxytocin is released in the stress response, it is motivating you to seek support. Your biological stress response is nudging you to tell someone how you feel instead of bottling it up. Your stress response wants to make sure you notice when someone else in your life is struggling so that you can support each other. When life is difficult, your stress response wants you to be surrounded by people who care about you. Okay, so how is knowing this side of stress going to make you healthier? Well, oxytocin doesn't only act on your brain, it also acts on your body. And one of its main roles in your body is to protect your cardiovascular system from the effects of stress. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It also helps your blood vessels stay relaxed during stress. But my favorite effect on the body is actually on the heart. Your heart has receptors for this hormone. And oxytocin helps heart cells regenerate and heal from any stress-induced damage. This stress hormone strengthens your heart. And the cool thing is that all of these physical benefits of oxytocin are enhanced by social contact and social support. So when you reach out to others under stress, either to seek support or to help someone else, you release more of this hormone, your stress response becomes healthier, and you actually recover faster from stress. I find this amazing that your stress response has a built-in mechanism for stress resilience. And that mechanism is human connection. I want to finish by telling you about one more study. And listen up, because this study could also save a life. This study tracked about 1,000 adults in the United States, and they ranged in age from 34 to 93. And they started the study by asking, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, how much time have you spent helping out friends, neighbors, people in your community? And then they used public records for the next 5 years to find out who died. Okay, so the bad news first. For every major stressful life experience, like financial difficulties or family crisis, that increased the risk of dying by 30%. But, and I hope you are expecting a but by now, but that wasn't true for everyone. People who spent time caring for others showed absolutely no stress-related increase in dying, 0. Caring created resilience. And so we see once again that the harmful effects of stress on your health are not inevitable. How you think and how you act can transform your experience of stress. When you choose to view your stress response as helpful, you create the biology of courage. And when you choose to connect with others under stress, you can create resilience. Now, I wouldn't necessarily ask for more stressful experiences in my life, but this science has given me a whole new appreciation for stress. Stress gives us access to our hearts. The compassionate heart that finds joy and meaning in connecting with others. And yes, your pounding physical heart working so hard to give you strength and energy. And when you choose to view stress in this way, you're not just getting better at stress, you're actually making a pretty profound statement. You're saying that you can trust yourself to handle life's challenges. And you're remembering that you don't have to face them alone. Thank you.
So as you move forward through today and beyond, take the time to connect. Join forces with your classmates, your faculty, your advisors, your coaches, your fellow club members. When I trained as a counselor, my supervisor told me to never sit alone with a difficult decision. I urge you to do the same. Do not sit alone with the hard stuff. Connect, find your pod, nurture your pod, and let them nurture you. Thank you. So I guess we left time for questions. So does anybody have any questions for me that I could address? Ellen?
This is somewhat humorous, but the person that bought the plane ticket, did you keep in touch?
I did not. And of course, I don't still have that same email address that I used way back. That was my first email account. I don't even remember what the address was. I'm convinced that I still have his business card in a heap of memorabilia, and I dug through it several times this past year, hoping to have it for this talk and to be able to reach out to him. I posted on Facebook asking if anybody had an old letter or email from me where I named this person. I have this vague recollection that he worked at Notre Dame, and that makes sense because I was flying out of South Bend. But beyond that, I don't really know how to get in touch with him. I think his name was Caesar. That's all I remember. Yeah. It would be great to catch up with him and show him what's resulted from that one kind act. Okay, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Melanie.